Hawaii's shorelines make for picturesque backdrops, but residents say beach parks have been overcrowded with commercial activities like weddings, kayak rentals, and tour bus drop-offs. More than a dozen of Oahu's most popular beaches are currently protected by a city ban. However, the mayor is considering an island-wide commercial use system that could affect that. Hear from both sides of the issue. This live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. There's a battle brewing at Honolulu City as the City Council considers Bill 19. The measure is Mayor Rick Blangiardi's plan to create an island-wide system to regulate commercial activities at Oahu's beach parks. If passed, it would allow local businesses like weddings, surf schools, and tour bus companies to operate with restrictions, but it would reverse years of work by Windward Oahu and North Shore residents who fought to win bans on commercial activity after shorelines were inundated with tourists. We're asking our panel tonight if there's a way to find a solution that will satisfy both sides. We look forward to your participation at tonight's show. You can email or call in your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests. Laura Thielen is the director of the Honolulu Department of Parks and Recreation, which oversees more than 300 parks and gardens across Oahu. She previously served as a state senator and as former chair of the Department of Land and Natural Resources. Honolulu City Council member Matt Wire represents District 2, which covers all the way from Waikele to the North Shore and parts of Windward Oahu. He's a graduate of the University of Hawaii's Richardson School of Law with certificates in Native Hawaiian and environmental law. Kapua Medeiros is a member of the Waimanalo Neighborhood Board. She was raised in Waimanalo and is a laymaker who has 3 children and 8 grandchildren. And Michael Waters is with Halia Tours and Transportation. He's been in the hospitality industry for more than 15 years, working in several positions, including sales agent, dispatcher, and as a state certified tour guide. Let me start with Kapua Medeiros. What was it like in Waimanalo before the government started really restricting commercial operations over there? And I'd like to ask all of you what it was like before we started really heavily regulating commercial activities.
Sure. Before regulations, and this is a time when I had actually not been back to Waimanalo for a while because I moved out to Waianae for a while. But when I came back, the tourist industry had just about been removed. So the tourist stops. So I wasn't there at that time, but I was able to witness the total inundation of commercial activity at almost every one of our beach parks, especially at Hunananiho because of the wide open spaces, the forest environment.
That's Sherwoods, what they call it.
Yes, that's Sherwoods, which we fought hard to, but it is now not Sherwoods anymore. We were able to have the name changed to Hunananiho, which is the original name. So not changed, but I don't know how you say it, but we got it replaced, yeah. Or, it restored. Let
me ask Matt Wire, give me a sense of what the North Shore was like before, in terms of the commercial activities in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the issues stemmed from, the commercial activity occurring, the tour bus stops, the inundation really of, beach parks. And then it led to, of course, congestion, traffic. You would see parking stalls taken away. And I think even more recently, right, the most recent beach park we added was Kokololio and Ko'olaloa. And, I think that's a more recent issue that's come up and been exacerbated, right, as we've seen folks pushed out of certain beach parks. We see kind of the creep.
Is that the one that's just alongside Haleiwa Beach Park?
No, this is over by Laie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just the most recent, right? So there's a total of 17, I believe, beach parks. 16, yeah. Mm-hmm. Might be one unimproved, I think, but yeah, 16 across Oahu that are regulated, from really, I think, community input and community push and, getting activated at the council.
Michael Waters, you've been in this business for a while. what was the condition like before there was heavy regulation, or has there always been heavy regulation? Has the business been, what was it like before?
Pretty much what it is now, unless you care and you follow the rules. Not a lot different. There's a little bit less buses up on the North Shore, and our guests have to walk a lot further. There is definitely room for improvement, to say the least. I'm going to disagree with the whole battle brewing. And I do put a lot of it on the City Council and the Parks Department for quick reactions without necessarily thinking of consequences. Kokololio is a direct and undisputable result of what happened on the North Shore. Now, that's not the North Shore community's fault. I used to really give it to companies that were doing things they weren't supposed to do, whatever. Now, I don't blame them at all, unless they're disrespectful to somebody like Auntie Madeiras.
How much of it, let me ask, how much of an issue was the illegal operators?
It's always been big, and it will always be big. If you're going based on the tour companies, just the name of the companies, I would say depending on what you count as illegal, you're looking at half of the companies that are advertising online that they're going to illegal places. If anybody at home wants to pull out their phone and Google Stairway to Heaven tour right now, you'll be able to book it. They gave it away as a prize on Jeopardy. And so it's not ideal, to say the least.
I want to just add that in our prior discussion, folks did acknowledge that you're one of the folks that really does try and follow the rules. And so I want to make sure that people understand who are watching this, that that's part of your values as a company.
There are two main reasons why I follow the rules. Out of respect for Auntie Kapua and the whole community, and two, so I can go into the City Council and say what I feel needs to be said, and I know that I'm protected in case anybody calls their friends to come and investigate my company, because I'm on point with my DOT, my PUC, federal DOT, all of that stuff. That's literally the only two reasons why I'm legal.
Let me let Laura Thiele, Director of Parks. You've been born and raised in the Windward Side. Let me go back to my original question. Was commercial activity the primary reason things were getting really congested?
You know, it started with the tour buses, I think, in Kailua.
Because and how far back are we talking about?
Oh, we're talking 10, 12 years now. I think it was when I was starting in the Senate. They were basically invited into Kailua town and giving parking spots, and Kailua became on social media like one of the places to go.
Oh, I see. So the buses were basically encouraged to come so they would bring customers to the merchants in Kailua.
Correct. And so then they started going into Lanikai, Kailua Beach Park. I remember standing on the corner in Kailua and just standing there for a 3-minute period, 15 tour buses going by. And so the community started pushing back with the Department of Parks to try and protect Kailua Beach Park. And at the time, the city was not willing to regulate the tour industry or to do anything. And finally, the council became frustrated and did a ban for Kailua Beach Park, the adjacent park, and the beach right-of-ways in Lanikai. And then what happened is the business started shifting over to Waimanalo. Mm-hmm. Then you had the bans follow in Waimanalo. There was some in the North Shore. Business shifted over to Kokololio. So one of the things the mayor asked me to do is he's concerned about we keep pushing the problem to the next community, and he's saying we need to have something that is island-wide that protects recreational spaces. So it's not a bill to permit commercial use, it's a bill to restrict and regulate what commercial activities may occur in these areas, so that we don't just keep kicking the can down to the next community and the next.
Matt Wire, has that been your perception? I mean, even though, where do you have bans in your district, which is Waikele to around the northern part of the West Windward Side?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think it's about 8 on North Shore, like Ali'i Beach Park, Sunset, Waile'e, a few others, Kokololio. And I mean, for me, like I think was mentioned, right, we don't want this to be necessarily divisive, but it's really where do we start? And I think we start with the public trust, right? And so these beach spaces, these public beach parks are available to our community, right, and protected under our Constitution. And that includes access to those spaces, and then, like I mentioned, the protection of those spaces.
Go ahead.
So, yeah.
If both of what you say is true, do you think the smartest place to start was by completely erasing all of the work that the community fought so hard to put in over the years? Do you think that was the best place that you could start this bill?
I mean, I think for me, that's why I voted no at first reading, was because of the community concerns, right? And also
Thank you.
Vice Chair Aina as well.
Yes.
It's just a very odd situation here because, you know, I've kind of not been that involved in this issue. I've covered various parts of it. But it strikes me that if you're trying to regulate something, you have to be able to enforce it.
Yes.
And, you know, Kapua, in your experience at Waimanalo, you could ban something, but if people aren't going to follow the rules, they're still going to be there, right?
In fact, the day after it was announced on the news that Bill 19 was introduced, the very next day, all of the tour buses came rolling back through Waimanalo when they had been banned from, I believe, 2017.
Which announcement was this?
18.
Which announcement was this that they?
So this was the announcement that, well, this was the first hearing when the bill was introduced, Bill 19. And so it came on the news, it made the news that night. And the very next day, all of the tour buses came rolling through Waimanalo again when they have been banned, stopping at all of the different parks.
But they were still banned.
Yes.
So they
they're
just showed
still
up
banned.
because
Yeah.
they believed that now they could say,
They
oh,
built-
it's all
They
shit
believe
different.
now they have the right to come wherever they want to again.
Okay.
Yeah. And it took so many years for the community to get those bans put in place. That was before I got there. Bill 38 passed in September of 2022. And February, March 2023, we get a bill that totally erases all of our hard work for 3 years.
You know, it's interesting, Matt Wire. You know, here's Waimanalo is a fairly well organized community, right? They work together. They had people out on the beach enforcing and so on. They get a ban. Kailua Beach gets a ban because it's well connected, also a well connected, organized community. Are the organized communities getting bans? Well, the communities that don't quite have that cohesion are ending up with the offshoot, the effect of people moving to their areas.
I mean, it's a
That
progression.
doesn't sound fair, is
No,
what I'm saying.
So I'll say first, it is a progression, right? So in terms of District 2, you know, North Shore is where it began, and then it went down into Ko'olaloa, across to Ko'olaloa. But I do think it's really those places that are most impacted by tourism, right?
Yes.
So when we're looking at other beach parks around Oahu, when the impact isn't as great, there's going to be less of a community concern, right? But then if you're, you know, in a small beach park in a residential neighborhood and seeing 5, 10 tour buses stop a day, that's going to impact your enjoyment of that park with your family.
The only thing I would caution is our impact is obviously easy to see, and both the positives and the negatives, there are a lot that aren't easy to see that take a long time. So yeah, it's okay for a little bit when you have 1 or 2 vehicles going in there, but then that 1 or 2 vehicles, especially when they're geared towards wealthier clientele who can actually come in here and purchase this property, they're basically going on a real estate tour. They come in, they purchase the property, kick the people out that are supposed to live there, and then get together and then ban tour buses. And so that's kind of part of the things that makes it a little tricky to operate.
Yeah, we're starting to get questions in from the viewers, and I want to honor them. Leilani from Kailua says, I haven't noticed any change in commercial activity on the beaches in Kailua. There used to be kayak rentals on the beach, and now they are just right across the street from the beach. What have the regulations done? Laura Thielen, I mean, is it really possible to end activity like that? I mean, I've seen people carry kayaks across the street. They park a rent-a-car and they carry a kayak across the street.
So one of the things we were trying to do in the bill is to deal with the issue of enforcement. And we took a look at what was working and what has not been working. So the first thing that's not been working is the current law allows buses to have a 15-minute grace period. So any bus can go in to a park, and if they're only there for 15 minutes, that does not count as a stop. So we said that doesn't work, because there's a lot of buses where they'll go in, they'll park, and the police will come by and they'll say, oh, we just pulled in, even though they've been there longer. And the police will say, you need to move on, and then they will. The other problem is, in the current law, you have to prove a criminal case. So in order to show a violation, you have to have a police officer prove beyond a reasonable doubt, take the driver or the bus company to court.
So these are petty misdemeanors?
These are petty misdemeanors.
Oh, so they're crimes.
So what happened in Kailua when they did the ban, they changed it to a citation, a parking ticket.
Okay.
That was very effective. So in Bill 19, we took a look at, we should change the entire enforcement system and penalty system to use citations instead of making them petty misdemeanor criminal actions, because that could be a more effective way at enforcing. Because right now it's not really possible. Each time you would see a kayak rental, that would have to be a separate criminal case. So you'd have to file a criminal charge against a person for Monday, and if they came back Tuesday, you have to start with a completely separate case, for Tuesday, and as opposed to being able to give a ticket.
I would like to push back on that. You're starting from a false premise on the 15 and 90 minutes. I could pick apart literally any aspect of the business that I run, from the PUC to the DOT, and it's not on them. They're great people, but like every other enforcement branch out here or branch of government, they're underfunded and they're understaffed. The 15 minutes, basically when you take that away, I'm not gonna go anywhere near you. Because as I mentioned in that meeting, since you guys changed the recreational stops, and during COVID, in the first few months when everybody was still very, very scared of what was gonna happen, he had us all get into a little small room, and then you totally changed the rules on the rec stop. And I understand you weren't there yet, excuse me.
Yeah.
When I say you, sometimes I am referring to the department. However, I can take any aspect of that and pick it apart. Now, for a suggestion.
I need to say because I think that the public is not going to quite understand what you're getting at, only because it's very technical.
That's fair. But for a suggestion, all you got to do is you take your permittee and your commercial parking spaces, you set up a meter for a commercial parking space, and then your permittee parking is somewhere different. And then you can leave the 15 and 90, and then I can earn you $250,000 per parking stall.
Okay, so let me ask Matt Wire, where are we now with, what do you think is the solution here? I mean, in terms of, do we need to have an island-wide system, or should we continue to just deal with hot spots?
So I appreciate Director and the administration kind of putting a pause on the movement of Bill 19. It's been in committee, so it hasn't even come back to council for second reading, and I know there's been community outreach, and I really think that's where it begins, and looking at, one, the parks, the beach parks where the community's already fought and achieved what they want to see. I think we can leave those in place for now, and then look at the other beach parks around Oʻahu, and see, maybe start from not the macro level, but do kind of a pilot at a smaller level. Maybe.
But in a way, I mean, I'm just, like I said, I'm learning this as we're going along. Isn't that sort of picking winners and losers? Like, here's the guys that won, they got a ban. Mm-hmm. Now we're gonna let the operators over here with regulation. I mean, I could kind of see where some sort of island-wide thing would make sense, but it also, from what Michael is saying, is it ain't easy.
Well, it depends on the activity too, right? So I think what I'm thinking, and again, I think this involves each community, because each beach park is going to be a little bit different, and each community is designed and shaped a little bit different, and both the families that use that space, and then also just the natural resources around it. But if we're looking at, say, tourist stops, it's clear that there's some beach parks where that's not appropriate, maybe based on the number of parking stalls, lack of amenities, a particular space, an ecosystem or the natural resources there can't be overburdened. And so I do think it takes a specific look at each particular area. And I know that was a conversation we've asked.
I agree,
Yeah.
totally, because I mean, if I had to make a choice right now, I would say there's places where tourism and commercial activity is welcome. That would be Waikiki, that would be Kahala, and that would be Ko'olina. And those places are welcome. Let's put a full no ban there. Let them all go there, but that's not where they want to be. They want to come into our neighborhoods that are our sacred spaces, that have our wildlife. And the thing is, if every business owner was respectful as Michael Waters, we wouldn't have to worry about making these laws that are not being enforced well. And that's the problem. To me, that is one of the key issues. If we can figure out how to keep enforcement happening, then neighborhoods may get a little better.
Well, but would you, just to follow up though, would you in your neighborhood, for example, be willing to allow a little bit of commercial activity if it was actually enforced as a little bit of commercial activity? Because the ban was because once if you don't ban it, then it opens the door for people to cheat.
Right.
Right?
No,
The
Waimanalo.
ban is clearer.
You're right, and Waimanalo is not willing to. We've already said we're not willing to allow any more tourism and commercial activity on our shores. And Waimanalo is a little bit special because every single beach park on shoreline in Waimanalo sits on Hawaiian homestead land. The city is leasing that from Hawaiian homestead land. That should be Kanaka first, you know, and if it's not going to be Kanaka first, then, and I've stated it in the city council that we're not willing to give up our bans. We'll take it into our own hands.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Director Thielen, a couple of questions, and I want to give you a chance to fully explain what your proposal is and how it may be evolving. Jeannie and Kaimoki, can we get a briefing on what the rules are now and what changes Blangieri is proposing? Director Thielen, how will you, this is from Raquel via email, how will you place residents at the forefront of any plan and make it work to support our local residents community? Our local residents are being tired of being placed second to tourism commercial activity in their own place. So could give us a sense, the elevator description of what you're trying to accomplish, and again, how would it be enforced? You mentioned citations, but you can't put police all around the island on this.
So what we were trying to do with the bill is to start the conversation about how should we manage tourism, because without regulations, the 51 beach parks and the 80 odd beach rights-of-way that don't have any special legislation, it's open season. So how can we change the law to provide protections for communities around the islands? How can we make sure that where commercial activity is allowed, it's restricted to hours and days where we don't have such heavy congestion? So we don't want weekends, we don't want holidays, we don't want the early mornings, and we don't want the afternoons, so we're not, interfering with rush hour and the time that the majority of residents use the areas. How can we address the how we enforce to make it something that's more enforceable? Because using the criminal justice system for something like a tour bus stop isn't working anywhere. So where we did put citations in, that worked, and so let's take a look at that. The idea of what do we do with the 16 parks and the limited beach rights-of-way that currently have bans? We needed to start the discussion. So we put the bill forward that just says, let's have the same thing at every park. But we knew that that was going to be amended. And so when we introduced the bill, we said, this is to begin the discussion. We want to get community input. And I think, as Councilman Wire said, we went and took a look at the beach parks and, what are the size, the number of parking stalls, things like that. And in having the discussion at the council, awesome. I think there was an agreement that, you shouldn't be having stops at certain areas. So, we took off the table in the initial bill, no beach right-of-ways anywhere on the island, because these are all in residential neighborhoods.
You mean no commercial activity at
Correct.
beach right-of-ways?
No.
Except for surf lessons.
Only at the ones that were currently allowed in the law, but nowhere else. No commercial activities at unimproved lands that are under the Department of Land and Natural Resources, or sorry, Department of Parks and Recreation, because those have not been, they don't have paved parking, so we don't want buses going in and having erosion. They don't have bathrooms. You know, they don't have other amenities where they're not maintained, so we don't need a bunch of people going in there and injuring themselves and then suing the city because of a problem. So we were trying to take an island-wide approach, and now we need to take the information that we got from the testimony and figure out, okay, what do we do? The mayor's clear that the original proposal in Bill 19 is not what should go forward. We want to keep the things that seem to have positive support. People are worried about enforcement. As far as citations go, we do have a federal grant and we're working on a ranger program.
How's that going, by the way?
So we got a really sharp young woman who just graduated with a master's in criminal justice.
I know you started to recruit for it. Have you been getting people? Is it?
Yes, so she is this is under the federal funds that are temporary, but so we're assessing the program. She's working for us full-time as the manager, and we now have 2 contract rangers, both of whom, one came from a park system in the mainland, and the other has gone through a ranger training along with the National Guard.
I'm going to come back to you again. I want to give Michael Waters from the tour industry. You're only representing your own company, not the whole industry, but I'm curious as to break this down a little bit. So this idea that there are some hours in a day, some days of the week where it would be banned, but then there would be opportunities during. How practical is that from a tour bus company?
The industry volunteered for weekends and public holidays. That's where she got it from to put it in the bill.
So
Several companies already do that voluntarily, although it is not in the bill. I may have my own personal feelings about early morning and late nights because my operation is a little bit different. I personally like the sunrise to sunset, but at the end of the day, it shouldn't be your call. It should be our call.
Would you say like the sunrise to sunset, we ban sunrise to sunset? Or?
So basically the old recreational stop permit allowed you to operate from sunrise to sunset, and there was probably a grand total of maybe 5 to 10 buses, vans, total everywhere on island from sunrise to sunset. The vast majority of the industry is at home by about 6:30. And the other thing that I would just like to mention, like that undeveloped parking, that's all part of the old rec stops. The only thing that needed to change as far as recreational stops is setting a limit, working with the community. It should not just be politicians, career politicians, and the political class that arbitrarily sets these rules that are never going to be followed anyways. What ends up happening is it promotes folks who just show up with a bunch of money, know nothing about transportation, nothing about Hawaii, and they see nobody else is doing this. And then it takes 5 to 10 years for anybody to actually enforce it. And by then they've made their money, they have their team, they switch up really quick. And not only that, but it actively disenfranchises local business owners who want to start a company, who've been in the industry for years and years, because they know the laws and they know that you can't do that. And we sit and we ask ourselves why, knowing the answer.
So Matt Wire, I mean, what you're hearing now from, and I know you guys have been in meetings already, I mean, do you see this evolving into a place by place by place by place kind of system, and how enforceable is a place by place by place kind of system?
Well, so like I was mentioning earlier, I think if we take a step back and figure out, where's a good place to start, maybe pilot it at a handful. Well, again, it depends on the activity, right? But say we're just taking tour stops and maybe pilot it at a smaller group of areas where the community is kind of on board. And that way, if say this park ranger program gets up and running, those could be the areas that they're focused on enforcing, because enforcement is an issue. And that was kind of the concern with the initial bill. And again, it's paused now, right? So we're talking, but even the rules we have now, right? Some community members are carrying around copies of the ROH to show HPD, the particular rules at a park. And so it's burdensome on the community, it's hard on the law enforcement officers. If we have folks specialized in this and we have clear-cut, standards in the ordinance, and I think it makes it easier for everybody.
That's why we pushed we pushed that they hire from the community for this ranger program because we're the people that understand the areas. We know what is Pono and what is not Pono, and but now we're hearing that it's going to be these people with degrees, which I understand, but they need to have some kind of cultural training from the cultural people in the community, and not just anyone.
What's the role of the community now as far as enforcing this, and what do you folks do, or what do the folks in the community
So
do?
we have people like Mia Lisa who tends to her garden at Hunananiho, and while she's there, she has her eyes open, and things happen almost every day, and we have a chat that's set up through our neighborhood committee, which I chair the Parks and Recreation Committee, as well as Hawaiian Affairs and Natural Resources Committee. So because we have that chat, we are able to receive all of this information, reports, and we're constantly making reports on the 311 app for the city, which is great to have, but it doesn't always get attention. And so they have done a better job recently, and we appreciate that. As well as the DLNR, they have an app now, which same thing, you make a report, doesn't always get attention. It's much better if a community member, if I can just call someone and say, hey, can you focus on this? But if I have to make a report on an app that never gets seen till next week, then it doesn't get enforced.
You sometimes end up with people in the community confronting the company or the actor?
Rarely, but there's times, and when that happens, it's not because of the community member as much as it's because of the rudeness of the lawbreakers.
Okay.
I will typically vouch for that. In Hunananiho, the exception is Kailua. It's a very different, and Pupukea. It's a very different clientele, and they feel entitled to treat people however they want to be treated. There was a video on my Kailua about a week ago with Peter cursing out a driver that was operating legally with their permits in a bus stop. But he felt
legally?
Legally. There's a city bus stop permit that you can load and unload anywhere except for Waikiki, including, if I'm not mistaken, Oʻahu and Olala. And if you don't know where that is and you have a problem with commercial operators, then I would suggest you find out where that is.
But I mean, is that a problem that when people in the community start confronting operators?
They have, Hunananiho, they have every right to protect their neighborhood, and the fact that they have to protect their neighborhood says pretty much all that you got to say.
Exactly.
So I've had experience where, yeah, maybe I wasn't treated like a rock star, which was totally fair in that situation. However, that doesn't mean, again, the Kailua Pupukea situation is not what I'm talking about. I was approached by somebody who lived there, knew the beach, knew what was under the sand.
And exactly, we have called HPD, we get no response sometimes. They'll say, we'll have to wait there for hours, and when they get there, they say, we can't help you.
Well,
we've even had HPDs say to community, tourists are first. Tourists come number one before you guys.
Well, let me, one of the suggestions that are coming, I'm getting a number of different suggestions of ideas here, and I'm trying to figure out how
Because the community is really sharp, and if you let us, we'll do an excellent job.
So the question to Laura Theoden from Mia Lisa from Waimanalo.
Yeah,
Can the city add more signage about the law in park? Businesses can claim they don't know and help back up HPD enforcement. Education is hugely important here. How much more could you do even with the existing scheme that would help people know what the rules are out there?
So, I remember when I was at DLNR and we had a problem with people approaching monk seals, and everyone kept saying education, signage, and one of the monk seal protectors sent me a picture, and it was like 5 guys under a big sign saying, do not approach monk seals, federal protections. And there's a monk seal asleep, and all 5 are like this in the picture, right under the sign. So, I think a lot of times people know full well what the law is. Enforcement's going to be an issue for the places with bans now, as you're hearing, and enforcement's going to be an issue with whatever we do with the rest of the island. I think coming back to what do we do, it's not fair to say to the communities around the 51 beach parks and the 80-odd beach rights-of-ways now, you get nothing. These 16 get a ban. And I think what we want to do, because we've seen where there's bans before and it pushes activity into other communities, let's get ahead of that. We had a bit of a break during COVID, so let's try and figure out what we can do that's fair, that gives some level of protection. Try to do the enforcement in a smarter way that can be more effective, that we've seen that it's worked in other areas, and see if that improves things. So we're not just kicking the problem into another community and then having to deal with it after it's gotten to be, a full-fledged, huge issue for them.
There's a question here from Dan and Makiki that kind of gets to this a little bit. I understand locals not wanting neighborhoods flooded with tourists, but what about residents who work in tourism? How do they make a living? How much of what the city is trying to do is to provide these experiences for tourists without making it so, as Kapua was suggesting, Ko'olina, Waikiki, or Kahala,
Michael Waters makes a living, and he's doing well. You heard him say earlier.
I don't know if I'd say well, but I do make
he's
a
not
living.
he's not like these big businesses that's breaking in millions, but he's doing okay. He's not starving, and he's following the law, so it can be done.
Again, though, I'm not doing that because it makes sense. I'm doing it out of respect for you, and so I can come in here and I don't have to worry about somebody knocking on my door a little bit later on this evening or tomorrow. Those are the only two. And also because the people who trained me how to do this took the time to make sure that I knew the laws, and it's only out of respect for them.
But it
And
does
you
prove
love
the
the
point,
Aina.
though, is that the tourism industry can survive without having to set up businesses in a public beach park. And so
Just because
part of the
I can
regulation
survive
is,
while I watch 100+ illegal buses, that is not fair, and that is not a valid point.
Yes.
Well,
Just
the
because I
point
can
is that
survive and I
we-
have a roof over my head and I have food in my stomach, that is not a valid point. Now, I do not disagree that we do need an island-wide solution. I've been saying it in the City Council since 2018. However, he answered the question, and I will ask you again, do you think that starting by ripping out all of the community restrictions and arbitrary numbers, when you have folks more than willing to sit down and work together, knowing that they're not going to get everything that they want, do you think this was the best place to start?
I think we had to start the conversation. And the other thing that
So that's
we've
a no.
discussed.
Okay, Michael.
No. And the other thing we discussed is when we talk about enforceability, as you raised earlier, Daryl, if you have different laws in different communities, it makes enforcement really difficult. And one of the challenges that we have with the existing legislation is it's not consistent. And so that's been thrown back at the communities, is it's difficult for the police to enforce. Even if we change it to citations and with rangers, it's going to be a problem. So we didn't have the answer, but we had to start the conversation. And Bill 19 was a vehicle to start the conversation.
Okay, let me kind of move to some more questions. Now, these both have a relationship. This is from Cheryl in Kailua. Sarah in Haleiwa is the second one. Laura Thielen said tour buses were encouraged to come to Kailua back in the day. Who is encouraging this is why? I think that we answered that question, that it was essentially encouraged by the business community in Kailua to bring in more people. And even if you try and manage access to beaches and parks, they are public, and in too many tourists coming into our island, as a result, locals cannot even enjoy our own beaches and parks. The question that I have is, a tourist can rent a car.
Yes, and we're fine with that.
And that's okay.
Yeah, we're fine with that. We're talking about big business.
I know, but
With big buses that come in with choke people, take over the area. They've even told our kids to get out of their way so that they can have their area. We've had wedding people that come in with all of these big foam flower things, and they leave it on the beach and leave. and it sits there until we come and clean it up. We've had photographers come in and say, because there's like 3 weddings happening all at simultaneously, they come out and they ask picnickers, local Waimanalo residents, to get out of their way to make room for their weddings.
Okay. The reason I was asking that question is that because what struck me is that when I go to the beach, at a peak time, you know, half the cars in the parking lot are rent-a-cars, and there's lots of tourists on the beach.
Yeah,
and for me, I'd rather be able to park my car and walk out to the beach with my family and not be inundated. A company like Michael Waters, you take a group of tourists who have not rented 7 rent-a-cars, and I'm just wondering, am I wrong to
my
assume
situation is slightly unique because, as honestly it looks like the direction that is going, I only do 1 family at a time. So at the maximum, I take off 2 rent-a-cars. A motor coach, at the maximum, they're going to take out 30 rent-a-cars. However, I'm not saying that motor coaches should go to every beach park on the island, but what I am saying is we should be reasonable. Now, also, let me paraphrase that. Reasonable also means that needs come before wants. So yeah, I want to go to Waimanalo, but she needs to have her community protected, and I respect that. And I haven't been there for a long time, but sorry, I kind of lost track. What was your question? Oh, yeah, so basically the rent-a-cars, the motor coaches, and the minibuses. You guys know less about that than I do. There's no reason why you should be writing a law all by yourself in some silo doing that, or when we have 1 minute to speak and you have folks driving all the way from Kokololio. It should be, again, us. It should be the community and the businesses all in one room with DOT, PUC. Nobody ever asked about lifeguards, any of that stuff. The reason why these laws are so hard to enforce is because they're done by folks who have never done anything relating with
I need
the
to
job.
give Matt a chance
Go ahead.
to respond.
Yes, sir.
You've
Sorry.
been sitting quietly through a lot of this. What's your feelings about this area of enforcement? There's like 3 things going on here. 1 is enforcement. 2 is which kind of businesses are the problem. And number 3 seems to be, and I'm getting questions like this, is that it's not the problem of in my backyard, it's overcrowdedness. It's not the tourist's fault. Like, is it overcrowdedness? Is it certain businesses? And is it enforcement? Where are you on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's bringing up good points, and I do think it starts with the community, right? So if we just come back to the most recent one at Kokololio, it was community driven in terms of Councilmember Sunioshi introduced the bill, and then, it was really the community that pushed it through. A group of, I think, a dozen or so, women call themselves the mermaids, kupuna, that even came to the council and were so respectful in saying, we're not saying no tourism ever, like we're okay sharing, but this isn't working. We're being inundated. This is our neighborhood park in a residential area serving our community. It's a natural resource that has to be protected. And so I think, folks that don't, aren't at the beach park all the time, or ones that are inundated with tourists, just have to remember that folks are coming out based on what they're seeing and they're experiencing. And so when we're looking at, like you said, what are they seeing and what are they experiencing? I think most folks, at least on North Shore, will say less cars are good, right? Less traffic is good. It's not either or. It's not, let's get rid of cars and then bring hundreds and hundreds of people a day to a particular park and tour van. So I think we need to be talking about what does managed access look like at, not the ones that already have regulations, but if we're going to do a pilot, if we're going to find some spaces to start to say, okay, these are places you can have, what does managed access look like there? Right?
Let me ask Director Thielen another question. Blake from Oʻahu. Has Laura Thielen or Matt Wire heard of the Park Maui program where Maui residents park for free but tourists are charged? Would that work on Oʻahu?
Yes.
Okay, so is that something that's in the works as well?
There's certain areas where we can manage entry, but there's other areas, like if you take a look at, say, Ala Moana Beach Park, you have 2 entrances there. It's a busy road that you're coming in off of. Where do you put a place to stop people to determine whether they're residents or whether they're tourists, and how would you set that up? So there's certain areas where it would be difficult to do a charge, and then you also have a lot of people that may be taking the bus to the park, walking to the park, and it would be hard to tell, one from another. So in the places where you can, it's feasible. In the places where you can't, because they're more porous, it may be difficult.
Another question, shouldn't the enforcement be done by DLNR rather than the police? Now, I understand DLNR has jurisdiction over the state beaches and the shorelines and so on, but I mean, some sort of unified working together system?
They have a
actually
lot
believe they
less.
should be
They have a lot less staff as well.
Well-
So there's only one guy for like a huge district. If we wait for him to come, we're gonna wait till next year.
Well, DLNR is beefing up now. They're really beefing up their conservation thing, but I mean, is there any hope that
I actually think it should be done over a pot of coffee by the appropriate branch from their office online. You can tell who's breaking the law just by looking at their website. It's super, super easy. There's no reason why PUCs are not required to be on your website. There's no reason why a DOT number is not required to be on your website. There's no reason why a recreational permit number is not required to be on your website. It's a free and easy adjustment for everybody that's legal to make. And I can get you $1 million worth of fines before I finish this cup of coffee if you let me turn on my phone.
And this is, I absolutely agree with him.
That's an
This is where
interesting
we
point.
want to change in
However,
the
that's
law
not
to make
what you have said to me before.
Well, no, I disagree with you on many things, but I agree with you on
fair.
that thing.
That's fair, but that's
But
not
I
what you
think
told
we
me last time.
definitely want to get, I think part of the enforcement is taking a page out of what was done in vacation rentals, make the advertising of the commercial activity illegal. Because the commercial speech is not protected speech, and then make requirements for things like having those registrations, on your website.
The big
as well.
difference, though, that this is a company that's operating vans, and they're mobile, they're moving around. So even if you got some, so what you'd have to do is you have to write a law that says you can't even advertise unless you have these numbers.
No, starting to stop at a park, I think is what he's saying.
I'm saying for all of it. Can you advertise illegal activity?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, so like, can you put on your website, join us for a beach stop at Hunananiho when it's already illegal? Can you say, let's go on the stairway to heaven when it's already illegal? That's the kind of stuff that needs to be regulated. Can you say, come to this huge event at Hunananiho where they're gonna have kegs of beer, they're gonna have drugs, they're gonna have drinking, they're going to have way more people than that is allowed for one permit.
Well, you know what Matt Wire, you're the attorney here. Can you do that kind of regulation, essentially of free business speech? I mean, is that something that you folks would consider, making that illegal and then penalizing them for the advertising?
I mean, you can definitely regulate commercial activity. Right, we do that every day.
But I mean, the commercial speech, the websites, what they're putting on the websites. Now, in the case of the vacation rentals, you could identify a location based on what you found on the website. But I don't know how you would enforce on a company that has advertising.
We have our itineraries listed on our website most of the time. I'm telling you right now, I can pull up a website. I'm not going to because I'm not here to get people in trouble. But you can pull up a website right now, look through their itinerary, you can tell they're illegal. You can pull up a website right now, look through, pretty good idea they don't have the stuff
and then
required.
hit them off.
Yeah, easy breezy.
So
you
is
finish a
that
cup of
part of the
coffee.
scheme?
We did have some things in the bill, and we're still working with the Corporation Council to see if we could add more in, but it's driving into a park with advertisement on your vehicle for an illegal activity would be a citation, subject to fines. Advertising, for the stop in there is something that we were looking at. Can we add that in, similar to the way they did with the vacation rentals? If you're advertising a vacation rental in an area where you don't have a permit for one, that advertisement is unprotected speech, and it's advertising an illegal activity.
We've had, ever since we passed Bill 38,
That's
the
the ban
months
on.
following, that's the ban on all commercial activity on all shores in Waimalalo. And right after that, we started to see these vans, unmarked vans, coming into our beach neighborhoods, our beach communities, beachfront communities, not going into the parks, but coming into these communities with little parking their unmarked vans, letting out all their tourists to go onto the beach, or if not their tourists, their customers for their lessons or whatever they're doing, and posing as we're just having a party. A gathering.
We've got about 5 more minutes, and I just want to try and find where there's common ground here. Matt Wire, what do you see as the common ground in this conversation and what's going on in these meetings in terms of what should the priorities and process be going forward?
So starting with one, not undoing the protections that already exist at the 16 parks. And then from there, identifying, okay.
So I've got 3 people here who agree about that.
Now,
right?
I do have one caveat. The truth of the matter is, I don't advertise at all. The World Surf League and Hollywood does that for me. They can still go to Pipeline, they can still go to Sunset. I'm not telling you should be able to bring motor coaches into Pipeline or anything like that. However, the law on the North Shore, if I'm not mistaken, the specific beach you're talking about is Aiʻi, right? I said on the record in 2018 that Aiʻi should be POW.
Okay, I'm going to stop for a second because I'm trying to organize this conversation over the next.
That's
4 or
my
5
only
minutes.
caveat. Otherwise, yes, we agree.
Otherwise, yes. Okay, so
Yeah,
so
sorry.
that's what it says. You don't necessarily disagree with that, but you want to see a much more comprehensive look at the whole island with a lot of individual conversations about specific places.
No, I think that's what he said, is the individual conversations. I think we're at the point, though, in hearing the testimony, that we understand that the 16 communities that have the existing laws don't want that touched, and I think we shouldn't at this point change that. And so we've been in this discussion. The mayor, as I said, has been listening to the testimony and listening to the community. What we're looking at now is how can we make sure that we're protecting and managing the commercial activities in other communities so they don't have things foisted onto them or moving into them and getting to the point where it's just completely untenable and unacceptable.
Okay, just so I can summarize what you just said, and it goes right to the premise of this show. Originally, there was a conflict described between the communities that had bans who were afraid of losing those bans because of the proposal from the mayor, but now you're saying we're no longer looking at taking away those bans, but we want to figure out a good scheme for the rest of the island.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, good night.
One request, real fast.
Go ahead. No.
I have 48 pages of bill here. There is not one thing about illegal operations or unpermitted
This is the other thing I
activities.
was going to.
Not one.
The illegal operations is a huge problem, and you know, we've talked about going on the web and identifying them. We've talked about rangers, but the amount of resource that needs to be put in this is considerable. What's the city prepared to do in terms of investing? The rangers thing sounds awesome, but it sounds like you need scores of people, not, you know, and I don't know that you can fairly put this burden on the police.
No, I don't think you can, and I don't think you need full law enforcement powers to be able to enforce this, especially if we turn it to citations, because that's a civil matter. It's not a criminal matter. The council ad for the ranger assessment was 5 positions, which is not going to be enough to go to all, 305 parks all total. So we are working with the PUC, we're working with the state tax office, we're working with DLNR to try and figure out how to be efficient. We don't want to duplicate enforcement powers elsewhere. So for instance, the PUC, if you've got somebody driving around without a PUC license, PUC has the ability to fine them. So if we see that, we did the other day, we've got information to the PUC, and we're able to document that, and then we can partner with them.
How often does the
enforcement
PUC do anything?
They do have enforcement powers.
But do they use it?
Yes,
I mean,
they do. And when I worked with the former chair back when I was in the legislature, and they were very helpful with notifying truckers about illegal dumping, because those are PUC licensed vehicles. And they can work with the tour buses as well, because part of the PUC is if you're violating the law, they can fine you.
I'm just going to throw this out, and because of my familiarity with this, and Matt Weyer, I wish you would respond, is if you're only enforcing on the licensed guys, you're not enforcing on the unlicensed guys.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's the
PUC can
unlicensed
enforce
guys.
against unlicensed
They're
people.
underfunded
If
and
you're a
understaffed,
motor
too.
vehicle, if you're carrying passengers and you do not have a PUC license, you are subject to thousands of dollars of potential
Do you
fines.
know
But
how
not
they
from
have to
PUC
prove
or-
that? Do you know how they have to prove that? How that process actually happens to where they get the fine?
So
Okay, we are done.
Okay, fair. Get me out of here.
I want to say mahalo to our audience for joining us tonight, and we thank our guests, Honolulu City Parks Director Laura Thielen and Waimanalo Neighborhood Board Member Kapua Medeiros, Honolulu City Council Member Matt Weyer, and Michael Waters from Halia Tours and Transportation. Next week on Insights, Waimanalo Gulch Landfill is set to close in just 5 years. The city needs to find a new site, but with various state and federal regulations to navigate, picking a location is a difficult task that's been continuously delayed. Will it end up in your backyard? Please join us then. I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha.